Hello and welcome to the Eating Disorder Therapist podcast. I'm Harriet Frew, eating disorder therapist, here to support you in overcoming disordered eating and finding peace with food. So today I want to talk more about identity using James Clear's work and applying this to eating disorder recovery. So firstly, I'm going to talk about my own identity in eating disorder recovery and how this really helped me to push through. And then I'm going to talk about putting James Clear's model into practice and how you can practically apply this in your own recovery journey. Okay, let's dive in. So I was in the murky depths of bulimia, grinding maximum willpower to manage an extra day without purging. It was white knuckling and precarious, and I felt that I could fall off the cliff at any moment into one ginormous binge, and it would set me back for days. So despite being in this awful, precarious, unstable place, I somehow knew that I would recover. Somehow, someday, deep in my bones, I sensed it. Now, I didn't have any clear evidence for this. I had no sensible plan of action or guru to guide me or airlift me to safety. In fact, the opposite was true. Days were spent obsessively restricting eating, over-exercising, and then ending up in the supermarket at 4 p.m. buying donuts, toffee crisps, and Doritos. I was spending money that I didn't have on food that would be barely tasted and then stuffed down in milliseconds later to be purged. And I would wake the next morning feeling mortified and ashamed, vowing that I would never ever do this again. Until, of course, I did. So how could I possibly know that I would recover? Certainly a degree of fantastical illusion and naivety was present. Now, I was fortunate to have spent the first 16 years of my life in a relatively peaceful place with food. So perhaps this helped. I had clear evidence that this was possible, as it was a genuine memory. Then eating disorders disrupted my life between 17 and 25 years old, and the intuitive eating years felt like a distant dream. So anyone that has ever experienced extreme dieting knows that you can't easily walk back across the bridge to the land of food peace. Dieting disrupts and changes your mindset. Physiologically and mentally, you're impacted by starvation and diet culture. Good and bad foods now exist. Guilt ripples through your body at the mere thought of something yummy. And fullness, once something that was a normal function of the body, feels downright wrong. You oscillate between states of overhunger and stuff beyond measure. I experienced all these things, but something still inside me knew that recovery was possible. And at 23 years old, on a Find Myself trip to Australia, I decided that I would train as an eating disorder therapist on my return to the UK. I wanted to support others and offer them the help I hadn't received myself. So I was idealistic and hopeful, and I was deeply wounded, carrying much unprocessed trauma. Now in Australia, I was still bulimic and chaotic, but the therapist's vision was now a beacon of hope on my horizon, a lighthouse blinking and drawing me towards the shore. But to help others, I would need to change. I recognised that I would someday need to emerge from bulimia and heal if I was going to be able to do this. Because how would I be able to support others if I was struggling myself? So what I didn't realise in my naive and youthful enthusiasm that my identity was not really tied to having an eating disorder. Now, I'm so thankful for this, and I'm not sure quite how I escaped it. But this was something that unwittingly and unintendingly saved me, because I understood that I had bulimia, but in my mind it was just a temporary state. I was going to recover and I was going to become a therapist, and I believed this wholly in my core. So my identity was focused on fulfillment and purpose. The eating disorder was not me. Yes, I like being thinner. I enjoyed the sense of control and oblivion I achieved through numbing out through food. Yes, I like the freedom to stuff myself to beyond fullness with desirable foods with potentially no consequences due to purging. So although the consequences were dominant and real, sore throats, acid reflux, tiredness, stomach pain, low self-worth, shame, and a deep sense of inadequacy, and my external life mirrored my inner state. I had no boundaries and people pleased to the nth degree. Predictably, I then attracted narcissists, over-controlling bullies, and other people pleasers, as I wasn't capable of healthy and functioning relationships with myself or others. I pushed myself to crazy limits. I was exhausted, I was weary, and I was deeply inauthentic as I showed up in the world with a glossy coping front whilst dangerously spiralling in deep negativity behind closed doors. Now, I'm not shaming myself here. I was doing the best I could at the time. The eating disorder was a life raft and offered a safe place. But knowing and believing that I would recover somehow did save me. It helped me pursue further roads when many routes had led to dead ends and failure. I kept picking myself up and having another go. I tried multiple approaches: therapy, coaching, white knuckling it, nutrition, talking to friends, reading books, changing my environment, anything and everything. And I restarted recovery numerous times. And through all of it, my identity was that of someone who would recover. I believed it to my deepest core. So this is such a valuable perspective to take on board, as your identity shapes who you become. And research shows that people who are successful in giving up smoking, for example, tend to identify as non-smokers, where if you identify as a smoker, even when you're not smoking, you're more likely to relapse. So it's not uncommon in the eating disorder space that your identity is strongly linked with your eating disorder. Now, this is particularly understandable if you were diagnosed at a young age or engaged in professional services. You're given a label maybe when you were young and impressionable, and that's going to be really, really unhelpful, and maybe have really linked yourself and your identity to your eating disorder. So the eating disorder may feel like a part of you. Perhaps it's been around for so long, it feels safe, known, predictable. You may not like it, but you don't know who you are without it. And you may be into fitness, perhaps you're labelled as the healthy one, even though you're struggling. You may be identified in your friend group as the skinny one. And maybe you've been praised continuously for your body shape, even though you've been internally struggling. So you probably derive a great deal of comfort and safety from your identity being interwoven with your eating disorder. You might not know who you are without it, but if you relate to this, offer yourself deep kindness and compassion. The eating disorder has likely been a saviour through difficult times, even if holding you back now. But when your identity becomes unhealthily dependent on your eating disorder diagnosis, this can keep you stuck. And it can drive you to unwittingly repeat and perpetuate the destructive cycles which feel so familiar. There is little headspace for hobbies or friendship or pleasure apart from food. The real world blurs into the background, and the eating disorder infiltrates into every aspect of your life, dominating and filling every life crevice. So, how can you begin to rebuild a new identity and let go of the eating disorder? So, valuable insights can be understood through James Clear's work, which talks about 3 levels of behaviour change. Now, James is the author of the best-selling book Atomic Habits, which has sold more than 20 million copies worldwide. So if you haven't read it, I'd highly recommend that you do. So he describes 3 levels of change, and these include: number 1 is outcomes, number 2 is process, and number 3 is identity. So that's number 1 is outcomes, number 2 is process, and number 3 is identity. So I'm going to talk about all of these. And if you want to look at the little visual from James Clear's book, you can go to the link in the show notes on Substack, where there's a written article of this podcast, and you can see what this looks like. Because sometimes visuals are great, aren't they? Just to help us clarify things better. So James says that all levels are relevant and necessary in implementing change, but sustainable change usually relies on a deeper identity shift, rather than relying on processes and outcomes alone. So first of all, let's think about outcomes. So outcomes in eating disorder behaviour recovery are more like the surface level changes, focusing on doing something differently. So in eating disorder recovery, it might include eating a larger quantity of food, maybe introducing old forbidden foods, maybe practicing food neutrality, reducing mirror checking, or not scrolling Fitspo on Instagram. Now, within the eating disorder treatment world, CBT, cognitive behaviour therapy, places much emphasis on this kind of outcome shifting behavioural patterns. Now, although recognised as a valuable approach, is not the holy grail, and it could be criticised for not rooting out or dealing with core issues. Because I guess focusing on outcomes alone in recovery without deeper change around identity could result in behaviours being limited by motivation or willpower, which will inevitably wax and wane. So they're likely to have a sell-by date. So it's challenging to rely only on behavioural outcomes in recovery. You are at risk of simply muscling through behaviour change, whereas your identity is still very attached to the old version of you. So the next layer of change in James Clear's model is the process layer. Now the process layer looks at changing habits and systems. So in eating disorder recovery, this could be planning meals and creating structure around eating to provide a scaffolding of self-care and safety. It might be implementing self-soothing practices throughout the day to calm your nervous system, to avoid a build-up of frustration and stress, which often accumulates in a full-blown binge. Now, the process part, again, is vital and necessary, but is unlikely to be sustained alone without a deeper identity shift. So let's talk a bit about identity and what we mean here. So the marvellous magic happens when you begin to change your identity. This transforms you from the root of your being. So what does this mean? So a change in identity involves shifting your self-image, your worldview, your deepest beliefs, and your judgments of yourself and of others. Your identity is what you believe about yourself. So for example, I'm the type of person who takes care of myself and nourishes my body. Then, when it's coming from an identity perspective, the goal is not simply to eat more. The goal is to become the person who values and respects your body with great nutrition for optimal physical and mental well-being. The goal is not only to stop body checking, but to become the person who values their worth beyond appearance variables. And the goal is not just to stop binge eating, but to become the human who regulates their emotions and becomes grounded wholly in themselves. Now, if you're metaphorically rearranging deck chairs on the sinking Titanic by toe dipping with behaviour change, with an identity still wrapped tightly up in the eating disorder, then change will be hugely challenging. So your identity is crucial. Building of a new identity takes time. But research demonstrates that once you believe in a new aspect of your identity, you're much more likely to act in affiliation with this belief. If you identify as genuinely being in recovery and healing from an eating disorder, you will start to take the actions that align with this. Alternatively, if you're only focusing on process and outcome recovery habits, which conflict with your deeper identity, it's hard to put these sustainably into action. So shifting your identity. Think about your core identity and the values and beliefs that you would like to embody, and start to visualize how this might look. Okay, what would your life actually look like? Can you see yourself on a movie screen? And then you take many steps to practice and embody these changes, translating this into recovery actions. Now, get support if you have blocks in relation to early trauma, self-worth, and emotional regulation. You might need to clear these to help you do this work. Now, eating disorder recovery is far more than embracing weight gain or stopping binge eating or other behavioural change. It is about healing from within and embodying change from an empowered root of an identity shift. When you introduce the forbidden food, you embody the identity of someone in recovery, you feel that energy. Now, it will feel strange and unnatural to begin with, but the more you repeat the behaviour, the more you integrate the new identity into your being. Small, repetitive habits add up to meaningful change when rooted in constructive beliefs. You start to believe and self-trust in the process. So decide who you want to be and become this person, literally one decision at a time. Prove it to yourself with the small wins. Be brave, be consistent, be committed. You can do it. Recovery is possible for you. Okay, so I hope you really enjoyed this podcast. I really enjoyed recording this one actually. I feel very, very passionate about this, and I really passionately believe about embodying change, really embodying change from that deep-rooted identity, not just about shifting those behaviours, because then I think we can get very much stuck in quasi-recovery. We want that full recovery, and that is possible for you. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. If you're not following me already on Instagram, do seek me out, the Eating Disorder Therapist _ for further support with your relationship with food. Do go to the eatingdisordertherapist.co.uk. If If you enjoyed this podcast, I would be so grateful if you would follow, rate and review, as it helps it reach so many more listeners. And if you would like to receive written articles of this podcast, please subscribe to my Substack. You do that for free and the link is in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to sharing another podcast episode with you very soon.